jeez. Remember Talia from Chicago? And yeah, okay.
Okay.
I'm
And that's
I'm
what.
delighted that Talia is the best taxi driver and guide that I've ever
Oh,
run into in Los Angeles, at least.
all right.
All right, we are actually ready to get going. So, hi Ray, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. You're an old. How long have you two known each other?
No, well,
Oh,
okay.
no.
Uh, Actually, we didn't know each other until we got involved journalistically. But ironically, we grew up in the same part of the Bronx. He grew up in an Irish neighborhood that I didn't dare enter, and I was more a mixed Jewish and Italian neighborhood. But it was good preparation for dealing with a world divided along ethnic and nationalist lines. And I went to City College, and he went to Fordham, the Jesuit school. And we have very different background. And Ray went into ROTC at Fordham. And when he graduated, and by the way, in my class at City College, I had a classmate in engineering, Colin Powell, who also was in ROTC, and he went into the military and became a very famous American general and right and political leader. And so Ray was, a child of the Cold War setting, and I'm older than him. He's a mere 86 now. Are you, Ray?
That's correct, yeah.
A child, and
Bob, let me just
so,
interject. I can't really see you. Oops, now I
oh,
have the picture of the classroom. Yeah, now I can see far better. So sorry for interrupting. You just
can you
came on.
see? Can you see me? It's all right. Yeah.
Well, I can see the back of, yeah, I can see the classroom. I imagine I'll see you soon enough.
Well, the reason is you wanted a copy, and we don't have the right to actually put the students on invade their privacy and so forth. So I'm trying to, we got the camera coming from the back so that you'll have a copy of what you said. And
Exactly. Now that's the way it should be, Bob. What I'm
okay.
looking at,
All
what
right, let
I'm
me get
looking at,
started here because
uh,
we're wasting a lot of time, Ray. So I want to make a point in terms of the country's history. We've been at war certainly as long as Ray and I have been alive, one way or another. I guess I preceded you. I was born 4 years before World War II. You were born, I guess, right in the middle of it, right?
no, right
Ray,
before it.
yeah. So Ray went into RTC, and he went right into the Army intelligence after his undergraduate. And what, you spent 3 years there?
Uh, 2 years in the Army on active duty, yeah, and then I transitioned to the CIA as
Yeah.
an
Then
analyst
he
of
went to the
Russian studies.
CIA, and he was there for 27 years. And as opposed to John Kiriakou, who we heard from, who ended up being a whistleblower, Ray was not a whistleblower. He was honored. What was some major medal you received from the CIA?
What was the Intelligence Commendation Medal, primarily for my one-on-one briefings during the first 4 years, well, during the first Reagan administration from 81 to 85. I had an immediate supervisor who valued my work and ran interference for me in keeping that job for 4 whole years, even though I was quite out of sync with my bosses, Bill Casey and Robert Gates.
Yeah, well, okay. Why don't you tell me the history instead of my bungling it here? So you went into the CIA. You were in Army intelligence, and well, tell us what happened after college, or indeed, what happened with college. I mean, what was your mindset? What was your view of the world? Why the CIA? Why Army intelligence?
Well, the Russians were a threat. In those days, they were a real and true threat. Never mind exactly why they feared us so much after World War II, but they did. And so when the National Security Act of 1947, I believe, was passed, and they created the CIA, and I had majored in Russian, master's in Russian, ready to go really with Russian analysis. I recruited myself for the CIA and was delighted to come in during John Kennedy's reign. So April 1963, before they killed him. Okay. And I was able to tell during my first 2/3 of my career, uh, tell the truth to the president as Harry Truman wanted when he set up the CIA. He wanted to talk about, well, he wanted us to give him what he called untreated intelligence. Okay. He didn't want to put us under the State Department or under the Defense Department. He wanted a unit that was responsive only to him, had career protection for telling him untreated intelligence. And on the Russian issue, the Soviet Union, it was okay to do that up until Bill Casey came in and Bobby Gates, his enforcer, and then they changed things around so that the Russians became a big bugaboo, and there was nothing that would persuade them that Gorbachev would be dealt with. And that was the glory of me being a briefer one-on-one for the first Reagan administration. I could tell them what my friends who I knew were honest analysts were saying, and that was what I felt, that Gorbachev was the real deal. You could deal with him. And it took Schultz and the vice president, George H.W. Bush, a couple of years. I briefed them as well, by the way. And it was not just my briefings, but it took them a couple of years to bring Ronald Reagan around. And we had historic rapprochement. We had a treaty that was unique in the history of mankind, where a whole class of intermediate and smaller range ballistic missiles were destroyed in place. That was the INF Treaty of 1987. That was because they trusted each other. Okay. Now a lot of water has flown over the dam since then, and not all of it with a good result. So we could talk about how things evolve, but right now I think we need to address what.
Before you do that, Ray, I've been criticized here by my esteemed colleague, in a positive way, of not focusing enough on timeline because we have people here who are 1/4 of our age. So I want to get the timeline right. So you went in, when did you enter the CIA? It was when Kennedy was in, right?
That's right, April 1963,
Okay.
4 months before they killed him. Okay.
Okay, we'll get
Now,
to that in a
okay,
little bit. Okay, but I just want to set the stage. The Cold War was on in earnest. We almost got into a nuclear competition with the placement of intermediate missiles in Cuba. There was a Cuban Missile Crisis. There had been the Bay of Pigs invasion of Cuba before. So these were stormy times. And then, in terms of this presidential briefing, I just want to get this straight. There's a team that briefs the president every morning or who he designates to get the briefing. So when did you start doing the presidential briefing?
1991, and I started with Weinberger because somebody was needed to brief him on the weekend. And gradually I became in the regular rotation. So with my team, on any given day, 6 days a week, Sunday accepted, we would be briefing any combination of the president, the vice president, secretary of state, secretary of defense, assistant to the president for national security affairs. And later we asked the president if we could add the Joint Chiefs of Staff, chairman, and he said, sure. So those are the people that, depending on their schedule, I would brief two or three of them on any given morning. Usually, Reagan decided he'd like to sleep in, and so he was treated to a briefing at 11:30 by these same folks who knew that they were being given the same president's daily briefing, preparatory to the meeting with the president. So it worked out really well. We would have liked to have seen more of Ronald Reagan, but he got to Washington and decided he'd like to sleep in. I guess he was entitled, as we say in the Bronx.
But just to put it historically, you briefed Ford, Reagan, and
Nixon.
Nixon, Ford, and
Yeah,
Reagan.
but during Ford and Nixon, I have to emphasize, we had no personal entree. Henry Kissinger knew everything about everything. He would receive the president's daily brief. He would annotate it saying, "This is crap. This is good. Oh, this might be good." And then he'd tear out stuff and give what he wanted to the president. So we never had the kind of personal access until Reagan came in. That's a long story, but we stole a march on everybody else by going out to the Pacific Palisades, announcing ourselves as the morning briefers. Reagan comes down in his pajamas. The Secret Service is nonplussed. Reagan says, "Who are you? CIA morning briefers? Well, come on in." Two of my associates had breakfast with him, and the rest of the story is they saw him every morning except Sunday before he came into Washington. When he came into Washington, then George H.W. Bush, his vice president, said, "I'd like to have the same treatment." And I think the Secretary of State, Secretary Schultz, and Secretary Weinberger should get. So Reagan said, "That's fine, but as far as I'm concerned, you guys do that early morning stuff, and then come see me at 11:30." So that's the way it worked. The good news is this was truly one-on-one. Okay. And so I was in a unique position, having watched Soviet foreign policy for 4 or 5 decades already, okay, since academe, to tell Schultz and Weinberger what the honest people in CIA, not the people that were put in by Bobby Gates, Russophobe from the word go. And I think we helped. We helped the vice president and Schultz in particular persuade Reagan that Gorbachev was able to be dealt with, and indeed, we had rapprochement, and we had a very key treaty that was later nullified by President Trump in his wisdom under the guidance of some of the same people like John Bolton, namely the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which I talked about in 1987. It was nullified in 2019, the year before, the year that Trump went out of office. So there's a lot of repair work to do. The good news is the Russians are ready to do that repair work. The unknown is whether Trump has the power and the will to make sure that he can actually deal with the Russians, get over this thing on Ukraine, and maybe even work out an arms control treaty to extend the only one that still is in existence, and that's the New START Treaty, which otherwise will expire on February 5 of next year. So there's hope, and there's hope on Ukraine, but there's very, very little support for this hope, largely because the Trump derangement syndrome, which I define as not being able to believe a thing that Trump says and not to believe of the man capable of doing anything smart or good or to the benefit of mankind. That's silly. It's just plain silly. On Ukraine, he's trying to do that. He's got lots of opposition. Let's see how that turns out.
Before we get to Ukraine, I want to just, because we are trying to focus on making this really accessible to everybody here in the classroom. When you invoke these treaties, I'm not sure it's self-evident to everybody what you're describing, what work goes into them, what their implications are. Could you just describe a little bit in more detail what that is? Why are those treaties so important?
Sure, I'd be happy to, Claire. I would remark one more time that what I'm seeing on my screen, the split screen here, is the audience. And if the intent was to obscure the audience and just let me see.
We won't see
Let
them.
me.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so the corollary of that is I cannot see you or Bob, but that's okay. I can hear your voice. Okay, treaties. Well, I grew up hiding under my desk to protect myself from the Russian atomic bomb. Okay. Really, really and truly. Okay. We thought that might protect us in some way. We gradually knew that would not protect us. And so I lived my whole adolescence and young adulthood always under the shadow of, my God, why are they building this new big building in New York when they know that just one mistake split it to smithereens, you know. Then I came and I was working for the CIA, and I was following Russian foreign policy. Long story short, my branch chief died while I was overseas. I was called back short of tour and made chief of the Soviet foreign policy branch. And that was a big deal, largely because we were supporting the SALT delegation, Strategic Arms Limitation Talks delegation. They were meeting in Helsinki or in Vienna. I had a representative from my branch I appointed to be with those delegations, okay? Then we had somebody working in the military side of things from my branch, and another one reporting to Director Helms and others how the negotiations were going. My opposite number at state was Jack Matlock, later ambassador to the Soviet Union. Now, Jack and I, we believed that there were ample signs that the Russians were truly interested in avoiding the prohibitive costs of an arms race, and that they hoped that the U.S. was serious as well. Now, who was it? Nixon, okay? Nixon and Kissinger were in charge. And the first thing we knew was that Kissinger shows up in Beijing. Now, what does it have to do with arms limitations? Well, it had a lot to do with it because we had been telling Kissinger that the Russians and the Chinese were at loggerheads. They hated each other. They probably hate one another to the rest of their lives, right? We did allow for more enlightened leadership coming eventually, but then they hated each other. So what was Kissinger trying to do? Play off the Russians and us, saying that, look, we Americans can steal a march with China, and so this equilateral triangle we used to talk about, Russia, Chinese, and U.S., would sort of flatten into a isosceles triangle where two sides would have the upper hand. The Russians were dead set against that happening. The more so when Nixon shows up in Beijing, the year 1972, January, if memory serves. My God, what happens? Immediately, the Russians show more flexibility on key issues like the four-power agreement on Berlin. They were just really stubborn on that. All of a sudden, they showed new flexibility, and we concluded a deal on Berlin, of all places. So we saw all kinds of things. And for the first time in my career, we were not being a devil's advocate or critic of U.S. policy. We were telling Kissinger when he asked us, yeah, it's working, okay? The Russians are afraid that the Chinese will steal a march in competition with winning a better situation with the United States. So it all worked out pretty well because in the end, my folks were able to point out these things. And then the issue of verification came up, you know, doverai, no proverai, Russian for trust but verify. Okay, that was very much in the mix. And so I got to go to Moscow as I was there when the SALT agreements were signed in May of 1972, and never have I felt more elated. I didn't have to hide under my desk anymore. I didn't have to worry about buildings being zapped. We had a balance of terror, okay? It was a mutual assured destruction, but it would prevent any side from thinking that they could launch a preemptive attack without suffering a devastating retaliatory attack. That was the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, which limited the number of anti-ballistic missile sites to 2 and then eventually to 1. Now, verification, we were asked, well, what if you think the Russians will cheat? I said, oh, no, don't know. Well, if they cheat, how soon will we know? Well, I went back to the people who run the satellites and all the other very sensitive collection devices. I asked them, they said, well, we can tell them in a week. I came back, we'll know in a week. Kissinger says, that's good enough. We'll conclude it. And they did conclude it. Did the Russians cheat? Yes, they cheated. In a couple of years, we found a god-awful big ass radar in the middle of Siberia. Krasnoyarsk was the name of the place. It had to be an ABM uh, violation. So we told Reagan, and he said, "All right, well, talk to the Soviets, show them the photos, get them to tear it down." So we did, and the Russians kept, "No, we didn't. But not an ABM radar, it's something else." And finally, when Gorbachev came in, he said, "Okay, it's an ABM radar. We're gonna tear it down," and they did. So the lesson here: trust but verify. If you can verify an agreement, as we did the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement as well, then you have something really good because you can call them on it if they cheat. That was the ABM treaty. I mentioned the Nuclear Forces Treaty that had to do with shorter range missiles in Europe, Pershing 2s on our side, SS-20s on the Russian side. What happened was Gorbachev goes to Reagan after they had developed a rapport, and he says, "Look, President Reagan, let's abolish all nuclear weapons, and if we can't do that, let's at least get rid of these superfluous missiles in Europe. We already have a mutual assured destruction with the intercontinental missiles and the submarines and the aircraft. Why the hell do we need these things, which would only give me 6, 7, 8, 9 minutes to decide whether to blow up the rest of the world?" Well, long story short, Reagan asked us, "Would that be a good idea?" "Well, could you verify it?" Yes, we could. And one of my best friends, Scott Ritter, was the first on the ground up there in a god awful place called Votkinsk to verify the chopping up of SS-20s. Okay, 2.5 years he was there. That's how long it took, but it was verified. A big blessing, unique in the history of the world, chopping up these big missiles. So what happened? Well, Trump, in order to prove that he was so much in line with people who hated Russia, he had been trying, he thought, to create better relations with Russia. Well, he let himself be persuaded to get out of that treaty as well. And so we no longer have an Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. And the big descendant of the ABM Treaty, which is New START, okay, that expires on February the 5th this coming year, okay? We just got months, okay? What's the good news? The good news is that Putin announced a week ago, look, we Russians are willing to extend the provisions of New START for a whole year, for as long as you meet it, as long as you do the same thing and you don't try to put stuff in space or other things that are clear violation of this agreement. Now, he awaits the reaction from Trump. There's not a iota to support the notion that no, we can't renew this treaty unless you make a lot of money from building ostensible air defenses that will preclude the arrival of any missile, which is physically impossible. Okay, unless you're making a lot of money on these new ICBMs and ABM mechanisms, then there's no sense at all that would say that this is a bad idea. So I truly hope that Trump will be able to get some good advice on this one, maybe from Witkoff or some other people who are not so Russophobic as Marco Rubio and those guys. So let's see what happens on that. There are glimmers of hope on arms control, and after all, it is the most important issue. In Reykjavik, in Alaska, on August 15th, the Russians did raise renewal or extension of the New START treaty. I'm not sure how Trump and his delegation reacted, but let's hope that they took it under advisement and that they see the merits of keeping out of an unconditional arms race. Right now, our offensive missiles are delimited in a very serious way. My God, if the floodgates are open just to satisfy these people, make a lot of money on this kind of program, well, that'll be more dangerous than ever.
Okay, Ray, I'm going to take charge here now because this is a class in communications. how we get information, how we use it, what are the limits, and so forth. What you just gave was, yes, if someone was paying a lot of money in graduate school or something, that would be a good lesson. Okay, but I want to get back to how we have, well, for example, the next chapter they read in my book is titled A Tissue of Lies, chapter 7. And my view is that most of what we're told about foreign policy and most of what people throughout the world are told about foreign policy is not anchored in any serious logical base or factual base. It serves political convenience and so forth. So I want to stick with that and get to more what's happening right now. And the lesson really here is that we had adults watching the store in the sense of serious people dealing with foreign policy, including Henry Kissinger and others, and Gates and others. They're serious in a certain way. You were in a position to be one of the most well-informed individuals dealing with, I would remind people here, this is not, whether the trains go fast or slow or what traffic light. We're talking about being able to destroy all of human existence and much of non-human existence on this planet in a very short time. If you get this wrong, it's not some minor exercise. And at that time, and the interesting thing, you mentioned Reagan. Reagan was very strong in his criticisms of Russia and China, communism, and so forth. But when Gorbachev came in, the Russian leader who ended up ending the Soviet Union, it wasn't our military or anything, it was something that came from inside. Ronald Reagan, even though he was a strong, Cold War advocate at that point, accepted the logic of it and as Nixon had done in going to China. So Nixon had opened up to China. That's why we have 6,000 students here from China. It's why Donald Trump is engaged in complex trade negotiations with China. It's why China is now the second biggest economy in the world and maybe the first. So when I say adults watching this store, informed expert people like Ray here, who was the lead Soviet expert or ran the key department of CIA, were able to wrestle with these questions of national security, nuclear weapons, and so forth. And whether it was a Republican or a Democrat running the White House, running the presidency, they were able to make really substantial progress. Then it ran off the nails, and the irony of this, the rails, and the irony of this is after the collapse. And I don't know if you would agree with this, Ray. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, so they're no longer a communist country, we got into more tension with Russia in a way than we had when they were communists. And so I want to shift the focus a little bit because there the responsibility is largely with the Democrats. I'm determined that this discussion not be blindly partisan, the bad guys, the good guys, and so forth. I want to get into the complexity of it, where both of these parties had been at fault of misunderstanding, getting to communications issues, misinformation, and in foreign policy, it's very easy to do that. So if we can guard our time carefully here, and I really appreciate your taking the time to give us a lecture that I don't think is going to be available at any other American university in this way this semester. I'd like to structure it a bit. And so the second chapter here now is that despite Russia no longer being a communist country, despite, this is what happened with Gorbachev, they ended it on their end. Wasn't a military conquest or so forth. We have these terrible relations with Russia, which Trump, one of his clear achievements is he can talk to the so-called enemy. I hope that's true because right now he's defined anyone in this country who disagrees with his policies as the enemy. So at least we know internationally he went to North Korea. He was first American president to do such a thing. He actually, was able to negotiate arrangements. He gets along with Putin, or has until recently. And so the question is, what happened in Reagan and Trump's first term? Is that Trump was accused of being a puppet, an ally, a product of Putin. And this is the Russiagate. And this came from the Democrats. So why don't you, as briefly as you can, explain what happened with Russiagate and why you were a critic. You were on Trump's side of that debate. I'm really determined to have some notion of balance and fairness in this class, even though we're in a very much polarized political situation. So, under the Biden administration, you actually were a defender of Trump against the most serious charge leveled against him is that he was somehow in cahoots with Putin and undermining America. The very charge that Trump is now making about the Democrats of different, he doesn't have Putin in it. So give us that chapter as
Sure. Now,
succinctly as you
yeah,
can.
yeah. Thanks, Bob. I would just start by saying, that it's really easy to be bipartisan or nonpartisan and non-bipolar if you're going to talk about the tissue of lies. I mean, there have been uh, journalists who have gotten Pulitzers for their tissue of lies. Lots of money, Washington Post, New York Times, others have profited not only uh, in honor as statesmen or crackerjack reporters, but lots of money. And I know a guy. Actually, I think he was the author of this tissue of lies. I think he was nominated for the Pulitzer maybe a dozen times, but he never would have got it because he was not able to not able to avoid telling the truth. So here's the truth, right? I did send a little clip of
Wait a minute.
one of my unfavorite people.
Were you just
His
making
name is,
excuse me, what was that was a reference to me?
well, who wrote the tissue of lies? I thought it was
No,
you.
no, it's a chapter in my book. Yeah, but
Okay. Yeah.
okay.
Well,
Yeah,
that's what I meant, the chapter. Sorry about that.
yeah.
Now let me.
See,
I sent ahead a little thing about Adam Schiff. Is that available to? It's only 2 minutes, but this would be a good way to launch not my defense of Trump, but my defense of the truth. The Democrats and the media and the deep state were playing fast and loose with the truth. We looked on in horror. We could disprove all the things they were saying, and we did, but we got no media, we got no prints, we got no air until far, far later. And now it turns out we've been vindicated, but you don't know it because the media, it's sort of catch 22, the same media that prostituted itself for Watergate, Russiagate, is able to avoid telling the truth on this still. So if we could set up that
which
little
video is
thing.
it then? Not about NATO or that's bogus? Which one?
No, it's the Adam Schiff one. Uh, I sent two. It's not about. It's the not about NATO. It's about Schiff, the second one. Let me, while we're setting that up,
Okay, I
let,
have it.
let, let me explain what this is about. We knew, that is, veteran intelligence professionals for sanity, which we created when we saw the lies that would justify war against Iraq. We established ourselves in January 2003, just a couple of months before the war. We could see that this whole business about Russian hacking, that was sort of the cornerstone of all the charges about the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee, stole those emails, which were so embarrassing and prejudicial to Hillary Clinton to make sure she didn't win, right? Well, we pointed out in December of 2016, okay, right after Trump won, but before he took office, that our NSA former technical directors, two of them, and one serious analyst, senior analyst, were able to disprove that it was physically impossible that the Russians hacked. Okay. Could we get any air or newsprint for that? No, we couldn't. But just 6 months later, a wonderful journalist for The Nation, Patrick Lawrence, played that story with new evidence. And it got in The Nation. And The Nation almost got sick. And they said, oh my God, we're going to put Patrick Lawrence under investigation. Long story short, they fired him for telling the truth. And now there's no doubt about the truth. Now, one of the prime movers here was a fellow named Adam Schiff. Okay, he was head of the House Intelligence Committee for a while. And right after the inauguration, right, of Trump, I think it was 5 days later, he got up at one of these Democratic think tanks, so to speak, and said what you're about to see. Now, I was there, okay, and I raised my hand right away, but they knew about me and they weren't going to recognize me. So I went up after the thing was over, not knowing the microphones were still on, the camera too, and I challenged him. It's just 2 minutes. And I think it will, if you put yourself back in the very, well, just after Obama leaves, here comes Schiff launching Russiagate. Do we have that clip?
We have, I'm going to play it right
Oh,
now.
wonderful.
Thanks.
Okay, great.
My name is Ray McGovern. I served in CIA under 7 presidents and 9 directors.
Thank you very much.
We have a little alumni group called Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, and we've been following this issue very closely. One of our members is the former technical director of NSA. I'm interested in 1 week ago when the president said this, I don't want to misquote him. The conclusions of the intelligence community with respect to Russian hacking were not conclusive regarding WikiLeaks. In other words, there's a big gap between alleged Russian hacking and WikiLeaks. The intelligence community does not know how or if that information, to the degree it exists, got to WikiLeaks. Now, you assert as flat fact that Russia did this. Do you know more than Obama?
Well, I would never claim to know more than Obama. I think he's a brilliant man.
It's a very serious
No,
question.
no, it's a serious question. I have every confidence in the intelligence of the Russian hacking of both the DNC as well as John Podesta.
James Clapper is a convicted.
You asked me a question.
pundit.
You want to hear the answer?
I will.
While I can't go into the classified information, I have every confidence that the Russians used WikiLeaks, whether Julian Assange was a knowing participant or, as the Russians would describe, a useful idiot. That we will hopefully find out, but I don't have any question in the conclusions of the intelligence.
You have every confidence, but no evidence. Is that right?
No, I can't share the evidence with you.
Yeah.
Congressman,
That,
I'm Paul
that's
Joy,
bogus.
former
That's bogus.
Security Center Intelligence. We always refer to it as the SSCF.
Okay, well, we can cut it off now. That's
Thank you.
bogus. Of course it's bogus,
Bogus.
and now it's proven to have been bogus. You know, Schiff was right out, and you can hear me now, can you?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, we
by
can
the
hear
way,
Okay, good.
Like out.
Schiff was
Does
right out in
anybody know
front,
Schiff's
okay?
front?
And the whole
Wait a
thing
minute,
played
wait.
out.
Can you hear me?
The whole,
hear you.
Hold on a second, Ray. Wait a minute. Adam Schiff
okay.
is currently, do you know who he is?
Yeah, unfortunately, my condolences to all
asking-
Californians.
I'm asking the students. They do know. Okay. He
Okay. All
succeeded.
right, so here's the role he played. He was head of the House Intelligence Committee, but then Devin Nunes, a Republican who knew about all the skeletons and what was really happening, he was sort of shunted aside by congressional maneuver, but he was able to get a session in the House interviewing the head of the forensics firm called CrowdStrike that looked into this so-called hack of the intelligence of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee emails, which were so prejudiced to. Now, why were they so prejudiced? Well, I mean, they showed that Hillary and the DNC had tilted the playing field so much against Saunders, Bernie Saunders, that he had a chance, a snowball's chance in hell to win. Okay, so that was very. So what happened? The Democrats decided, well, we'll blame it on the Russians. The Russians hacked and divert attention to the content of the emails. It worked like a charm. So here's at the end of Adam Schiff's tenure in the committee. The Congress is about to change, and Schiff will take over again in January. So this is December 5, 1917. Okay, what happens is he gets Sean Henry, the head of CrowdStrike, which is sort of like a cottage industry for the FBI, run by a fellow named Sean Henry, who was the FBI specialist on cyber and stuff under previous FBI directors. He's got his own firm now, and for some reason, James Comey says, "Well, we don't want to do the forensics here. Well, let's CrowdStrike do it." And everything said, "Oh, CrowdStrike found Russian hacking," but then they got him under oath, okay? And Adam Schiff is the first questioner, December 5, 2017. Okay, tell me, Mr. Henry, Sean Henry, you're head of CrowdStrike. You did the forensics. Tell me how it is that the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee. And Sean Henry is like, and his lawyer grabs him and says, "Look, remember, you're under oath. For God's sake, you're under oath. Okay, you're under oath." Says, well, actually, there's no technical evidence that the Russians hacked into the Democratic National Committee. Actually, we don't have any evidence that anyone hacked those emails from the Democratic National Committee. There was some evidence that things were set up to be exfiltrated, but we never saw anything in the ether on the web. So nobody hacked into the Democratic National. Now, Schiff apparently didn't know that when this guy was put under oath, he was going to have to tell the truth. Okay, so what happened? Well, Schiff became the chairman. He buried that testimony for 2.5 years. 2.5 years, it is safe. Finally, somebody tells the first President Trump, "Hey, you're the president. Why don't you get that testimony released?" I mean, it shows what they were doing. And Trump says, "You think I did it?" So he does. He has one of his minions call up Schiff and say, "Look, if you don't release that testimony, we're going to release it." What was that? That was the date of May 7th, 2020. Again, 2.5 years after the testimony itself. Okay, so what did Schiff do? He said, "Okay, I'll take care of it." It was released with about 53 other documents, and guess what? The media missed it. And anything that McGovern or his associates or anybody else that's honest here wanted to show that, look, not only did Schiff lie about the Russian hacking, but he kept it in his vault for 2.5 years. And what is it now? What is it? Oh, it's October 1st, 2025. Do you know that the head of the cyber firm that the FBI hired to do the forensics on the Democratic National Committee emails, do you know that he said on December 5th, 2017, there was no Russian hacking? Okay, so that's the Democrats. Now let me, as I say, we have equal opportunity deceptions here, equal opportunity crimes. Biden, of course, was another chapter, and we have something here that of course Biden was saying, look, the Russians, my God, you can't trust the Russians. The Russians are not only going to go into Ukraine, and they probably will, and the Russians won't stop in Ukraine. They'll go into Poland. They're going to the Baltic states. If you think they stop in Ukraine, forget about it, okay? Now, the whole thing about NATO says says the Biden administration. That's a canard. That doesn't matter. So I have a second clip here, which again is only 2 minutes and 6 seconds, I think, which shows the power of the media, the mainstream media, in assuring us all that despite the Secretary General of NATO saying 2 years ago, yes, the Russians said to us, if you don't stop trying to get Ukraine into NATO, we will have to invade Ukraine. So that was his condition. So we said no, and he invaded Ukraine. Aha. What? But he wanted to prevent expansion of NATO. And we got Finland and we got Sweden. So 2 out of 3, not bad. By that time, 500,000 young Ukrainian men had been killed, okay, 2 years ago. So this is the kind of leadership we have with NATO. If you watch this little clip here, pay attention to the very beginning because that's the latest admission. And that happens to be the only true part of that video. Do we have that clear?
Yes, we do.
President Putin actually sent a draft treaty that he wanted NATO to sign to promise no more NATO enlargement. That was what he sent us. And that was a precondition for not invade Ukraine. Of course, we didn't sign that. So he went to war to prevent NATO, more NATO close to his borders.
Flashback.
This is fundamentally not about NATO expansion.
It was never about NATO enlargement. It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO expanding toward Russia.
This was never about NATO.
Absolutely nothing to do with NATO expansionism.
And it has nothing to do with NATO.
This is not about NATO.
Not about NATO. It's not really about NATO.
This is not about NATO.
Seriously, it's not about NATO.
This was never about NATO.
It was never about NATO. Let's be honest.
This doesn't have anything to do with NATO.
Nothing to do with NATO at all.
Claiming it's like security purposes, but we can see the clear reason.
But NATO is not the reason.
This is not about NATO expansion. This is about the democratic expansion.
Ukraine bans religious organizations.
We are protecting democracy right now.
Ukraine is banning political parties.
Because it's a democracy.
Ukraine restricts books and music.
It's about democracy.
Ukraine won't hold elections.
It's about democracy.
And it's not about NATO expansion.
This war in Ukraine is not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It has nothing to do with NATO. Nothing to do with NATO expansion.
It's not about NATO expansion.
Nothing to do with NATO.
It isn't really about NATO.
It's not about NATO.
It's not about NATO enlargement. In fact, it has nothing to do with NATO.
It's not about NATO
It was
encroaching.
not about NATO. NATO is just a fictitious, imaginary adversary for Mr. Putin and for Russia.
It was never about NATO.
That's not what it's been about. It's been about him trying to expand his sphere of influence.
Well, I mean, the two are not mutually exclusive. Obviously, Russia has wished for a sphere of influence over Ukraine, but if the West had not challenged Russian interests so directly, I think that there was a chance to avoid this war.
He wanted us to sign a promise never to enlarge NATO.
I think we can end it there. Yeah.
The reason why Putin invaded Ukraine is because of his evil.
It's about the
Okay, sorry.
So before we lose the thread
That's
here,
it.
what we have is the Democrats were attacking Trump for his whole relationship to Putin and his, at the time anyway, he didn't accept the narrative about the Ukraine war, and he has tried to bring peace in that area. And now his relations are more tense. But the reason I think this is significant is it's very easy just to try to see who are the good people and the bad people. And if you try to do that about foreign policy in any country, you're going to miss it. Because in fact, that's why in my chapter, I call it a tissue of lies, that governments proclaim the right to control the narrative in foreign policy. And that's why we have to have whistleblowers, because governments say this is national security. We don't have to tell you the truth. We don't have to reveal the documents. And so, as has been said historically, the first casualty of war is the truth. because patriotism sets in. That's why Washington warned about the impostures of pretended patriotism. And one argument against empire is that if you're going to build an empire, for instance, when the Greeks did it with Alexander, you then have to lie and justify, and your public can't challenge it because it's happening elsewhere and they don't have the information. They don't know whether it's about Vietnam, whether it's about Iraq, whether it's about the Ukraine, whether it's Russia, whether it's China, whether it's the United States. The whole idea of representative government where the citizenry can control the government is really called into question because national security says you can't tell you. So, for example, the last person we had who had been in the CIA, John Kiriakou, was involved in the capture of the most important, allegedly most important Al Qaeda suspect. He was there and involved with the questioning and everything else of this person. And I want you to ask you about this, Ray, before we lose you today. The movie Zero Dark 30, which said that actually torture was important to finding out where bin Laden was and dealing with that when that itself was a lie. So I want to, because I want to leave room for students to challenge you, challenge me. I want to get now to, so we've shown Donald Trump was himself a victim of misinformation and bad reporting. I think I don't have any trouble accepting that. And yet now, as president, Donald Trump is doing the same thing. He's using some notion of the enemy and foreign policy. And just yesterday, in his meeting with top military people, who he summoned to Virginia, he branded, now it's no longer China's the enemy or Russia's the enemy, what Orwell was talking about in 1984. He now says it's every major Democratic mayor. These are people who were elected to be the mayor of American cities, including here in Los Angeles, right? And he's saying they are the enemy, and he's doing something that Orwell predicted. He's using the notion of the enemy to condemn the electoral choice of American people for who should run their cities, or in the case of Gavin Newsom, their governor of California. So I wonder now, we've shown how the Democrats did it. Can you discuss the most recent news now with Trump and his concern about the enemy within? And he talked in this thing, which was really quite sobering, that he would use the military as training exercise to learn by policing American cities. And there's a whole history in this country of not using the military in a domestic sense. So could you switch the topic now from Russiagate, right, to what is now, what it would be the word? It would be, well, it's Trump's outlining. He's now got his own gate. I guess it's Newsom gate, or it's Democratic mayor gate. Okay.
Should we just add, like,
Yeah,
how many people, just 1 second,
Um,
Ray. How many people here have heard that speech already? Have heard Trump's speech to just a handful. So it's very easy to find and go ahead and
It's a historic speech. It will be remembered for the next, if the world is still around, it will be remembered as a pivotal speech. And whether you disagree with Trump or, like, I try to be fair about Trump. It's not always easy, but it's a critical challenge. We have to be scholars and we have to observe fact and logic. But just as I thought the attacks on Trump with Russiagate were really irresponsible and mangled fact and reporting, and I thought the media was complicit, I'm actually equally shocked at the speech and its characterization. So I think this is a time, particularly for a communications class, we have very clear what was done to Trump, he's now doing to his opponents. So we have a good case study of the use of misinformation and distortion in politics, which, given what we're talking about, the possibility of war, arresting a lot of people, destroying democracy, or so forth, couldn't be more consequential. So, for a Contours of Change class, we are actually in real time experiencing one of the truly pivotal moments in this country's history. So, why don't you give us your take, Ray? And again,
Okay.
we're trying to be Socrates here. So we're trying to be,
I just want to make sure everybody knows then, if they didn't hear it, what was said, just to clarify. That Trump has used the phrase enemy within and is referring to his right to deploy the US military domestically. Is that clear? Okay. Go ahead, Ray.
Well,
Thank you.
yeah. Well, let's finish the first contour. We need to pay attention to people who had it right all along. John Mearsheimer, the archdeacon of the realism school of international relations, said this exactly 10 years ago in foreign affairs. Okay, this is worth remembering. There are people who know which end is up, and they are banished. They are not allowed to speak out. They're given no play, except for this one instance where foreign affairs allowed this essay to quit. What John said was the U.S. NATO facing into whether to keep trying to get Ukraine into NATO face a choice. They can exacerbate hostilities with Russia and devastate Ukraine, or work to create a prosperous but neutral Ukraine. Now, two years ago, he said also this: Putin invaded Ukraine with great reluctance. I do not think he had any other options. He was deeply committed to the Minsk agreement so that he would not have to invade. I share that view. It's not one that gets around and about, but those who believe that the invasion of Ukraine was unprovoked, that it was full scale, and that it was illegal, well, I can disprove the first two. You have Richard Falk addressing the legal question. He says it's unsettled law. Now, transitioning to Trump, my God, everyone really should read that speech. Actually, it's better if you saw the speech yesterday. I don't usually quote William Crystal, okay? But here's what he said this morning. He talks about the silence of the generals. My
you should
good.
explain that William Crystal has been a major conservative commentator, and as was his father, and they are associated with the neoconservative position. Yeah.
He talks about whether American people can rise to the occasion. The question which Judge William Young has raised.
Well,
Whether Palestinian campus activists can be arrested on the spot and deported. That should have to do with all of you people, whether you're colleagues or you yourself who support Palestinian aims, whether you can be deported or silenced for that. My God, what about the First Amendment? Here is what the judge ends up saying in this decision. I am afraid that President Trump believes that the American people are so divided today that they will not stand up, they will not fight for and defend the most precious constitutional values so long as they are lulled into thinking their own personal interests are not affected. Okay, they came for the communists, they came for the Jewish people, they came. You know the story. It happened before. It happened during my lifetime. Okay, and no one could find their voice. Not even the Catholic or the Lutheran Church could find their voices. The voice has to be ours, okay? Because nobody else is going to do it. So what we have here is this judge who came down with this decision. Look, Trump has gone way beyond his constitutional prerogatives to say that these campus activists, Palestinian supporters, can be treated in the way they have been. That's the good news. And all I'm saying is that none other than William Crystal applauds that and double quotes what I just said, that the Trump is counting on us being so divided. Look, this didn't happen before. I was alive when this happened, and we have accounts from the Third Reich. Before the Third Reich, when Hitler was a minority power, 1933, all of a sudden there was a 9/11 event, the burning of the Reichstag building. Blamed on the communists. And then one lawyer who was studying to be a judge there gave this account. He said, at this, all Germans fell into what he called Schafsmäßige Ergebenheit. Okay? Schaf, sheep, sheepish submissiveness. Okay? Now that's what we have to avoid here. And we have lots of precedent here. We have the silence of the generals. Now, what happened yesterday when Trump spoke? This is amazing. He came in and he says, okay, oh, wait a second. Nobody's applauding. They're just standing up ramrod straight as generals do without applauding. And so what did he say? He says, look, this is the first time I came into a place like this without applause. Now, have a good time. This is a good direct quote. Have a good time. And if you want to applaud, applaud. And if you want to do anything you can do anything you want. And if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank. There goes your future. Whoa. Now, I happen to take this very seriously because I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies. And what Bob has just referred to, training troops in our cities like Los Angeles or Chicago or Portland, that's against the Constitution, okay? That's unconstitutional. And these judges are now saying that. Now, here's what, let's see, yeah. I just want to say that Trump had not yet talked about using the military in that way. Even so, I would have hoped that one general, one admiral would have gotten up at that time, realizing that this is unconstitutional, and left the room, not caring about his rank, not caring about his future. He's going to be okay. He's not going to be out with his hat on the street, okay? But none did. And therein lies the story. The military has been politicized to a degree that I've never seen before. And I'll just give you one personal vignette. After the debacle of the Iraq War, where intelligence was prostituted to justify the war, there were no weapons of mass destruction there. There were no ties between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, okay? These were all lies, a tissue of lies. So after that, we had this commission that the Senate looked into this, and they said, look, the evidence ginned up to support this was uncorroborated, contradicted, and even non-existent. So what does non-existent intelligence look like? That was a Senate investigative report. It was bipartisan, and it was after 5 years of study. So what we've got here is an intelligence community that kind of fell in with what this was all about. And now we have a bevy of generals who just followed orders. And I just want to use one example of one time where Air Force officer did stand up. It was 1973. His name was Harold Herring. And he asked a simple question during a training session. Quote, how can I know that an order I received to launch my missiles came from a sane, S-A-N-E, president? The question cost him his career. Military members are trained to execute orders, not question them. But today, both the man who can order the use of nuclear arms and the man who would likely verify such an order gave disgraceful and unnerving performances in Quantico. How many officers left the room asking themselves Major Herring's question? How can I know that an order I received to launch my missiles came from a sane president. That's the bad news, okay? Now, if I were the president's daily briefer of Vladimir Putin, this would be a tough job. This guy is mercurial, but he's sort of like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde on authorizing, on condoning and financing genocide and forced starvation in Gaza. And yet the signs are very real that he wants to come to a deal on Ukraine. And there is going to be a deal on Ukraine if Trump is able to overcome the internal opposition that he encounters on Ukraine. Now, here's the deal. What Trump has rather artfully done, probably with the help of Witkoff, said, okay, look, you Europeans, you're really interested in making sure Ukraine doesn't lose. You have much more at stake here. So good luck. We couldn't do it after 3 years. So look, they'll need weapons. You buy the weapons from us, and then you give them to the Ukrainians. Now, what's wrong with that? We don't have any weapons. Our stocks are so short. It's going to take years. Okay, so there are no weapons to give them. The Europeans don't have money to buy the weapons. Oh, that's a little problem. They could scrape up some money, but they're not going to be able to buy any weapons for many years. And last but not least, by that time, there'll be no Ukrainian soldiers to use these weapons. So other than that, it's a great deal. But that's where Trump and his vice president, who said, we're done with Ukraine. That's where we are. Now, is Putin willing to be flexible enough to offer some lipstick for this pig of defeat suffered by the US, NATO, and Ukraine? Yeah, he is. And he gives lots of evidence that he's willing to trust, that he thinks Trump is sincere. My God, after all the betrayals they suffered on Ukraine, he's willing to deal. He doesn't want to take over all Ukraine. That's the crux of it, folks. He knows what Vietnam was like.
Ray, can you hear me?
Let me stop now. I hear somebody trying to interject.
It's me, Bob. Hi. So I want now. If the class doesn't get involved, this whole thing is a waste of time.
Right.
Okay, so let's just agree on that. And I want to invoke Socrates here again, because that's what education is all about. And we have a dwindling crowd anyway. So what does this mean to anybody here? I have certainly asserted these are pivotal moments in world history, going back to Russiagate, talking where we are now. I think the future of humanity hangs in the balance. Here we have a former briefer president who certainly agrees. Does it resonate at all with you, or do you think it has nothing to do with you? And I've had some encounter with some of you and some of the sections and everything, and some people think, hey, this is not my concern. Do you have any sense at all that there are, I mean, at one point I do want to assert here, the American public, by all of the polling data, is alarmed. The American public, the world public, very alarmed. However, that public is also divided. They think things are in a really bad way, but they blame the other party. So they're almost equally divided as who's responsible for what may be the most frightening mess the world has ever been in. Does it register to an undergraduate at the Oasis of USC? Does it have anything to do with your career plans, with your course of study, with what you get out of your education? Okay? Or are we in such a bubble that you're going to just keep worrying about everything from your social life to what this exam, which you have a right to worry about? And then someday your grandchildren will ask you, where were you, if there is still a world, as people do ask about the missile crisis, where were you when this is all happening? Oh, I was in school and I was more worried about whether I had a good date for Saturday or whether I'm going to the game. Okay,
But part of the lesson is that this is not an accusatory question. It can sound like one. The bubble is the fault or the responsibility of the media that would exclude the
And
third
the
stories
university.
and the universities that would
Yeah.
feature them either. So we're not asking, what are you doing sitting on your butts? Like, this is a real
So we have
question about
mics.
exposure
People don't like to use these.
and opportunities for the conversation itself. So I would phrase it more like this. What did you know or had you come to understand about US-Russia foreign relations until our class today, before our class today?
Well, what do you want to question or challenge? You have a right to tell Ray McGovern he's wrong, or he's missing the story, or you trust the president, or why you trust the president, or why you trusted Biden before him, or you don't think it's a tissue of lies, or come on.
Well, Bob, let me interject here. If we're
No,
going to do
no, Ray, you can't. Okay, go ahead and interject, but do
if
it.
we're going to do Socrates, I feel a little bit vulnerable here because they did him in because he was accused of making the worst case appear the better and corrupting the youth. So if I'm corrupting the youth, I'd really like to learn from them and find out where they disagree and why I should be clearer or why I should change my views. So I'm all for Socrates. He was a great friend of mine.
Yes.
Let's hear from Carlotta and then Dylan.
Well, to answer the last question first, I'm definitely more inclined to trust those that were more like on ground level in terms of doing the work. So I definitely really appreciate this lesson and to hear this information from a first person account. And I'm more inclined to trust that because what really stuck out to me, kind of to bring in the other questions in here, when watching that video about it's not about NATO, I was reminded about how often I had actually heard that phrase, like all these news clips pasted together. I think I recognized some of them, right? So I was pretty shocked because even if I think I'm well informed in this bubble, mostly because I'm an Annenberg student and I'm trying my best to, and I think it's super important, even if I think I'm being at least mediocrely informed, um, it's hard to sometimes look past the biggest messages. You know, if they keep repeating, it's not about NATO, it's not about NATO, then it's kind of hard to ignore that or question that. So I would agree that there's a bit of a bubble, but I would definitely say that depending on personal experiences or privilege, um, I'm people are definitely trying to get involved and understand what's going on, especially because right now this will definitely have an influence on our personal lives, some more than others, especially children of immigrants like myself, and so forth.
That's really helpful. And I will just say, based on reading people's papers, the message I'm getting is that people locate themselves in relation to these crises is very urgently, actually. So even if we're not hearing from everybody here, that's my impression so far. This group, go ahead.
Sorry, my question is totally off topic, but I did have a question for Ray, if that is okay with the class. Ray, you on Monday had spoken with Judge Napolitano on
Right.
a podcast where you mentioned that the CIA funds Latin American narco terrorists. And I was just kind of curious to get your perspective on whether you see kind of the rising noise about narco terrorism as a way for the United States to pivot the money it spends on its defense budget as a way of or as like an extension of the war on terror or as a separate issue itself. I was just kind of curious what you thought about that.
That's a really good question. The proof is in the pudding. The head of the CIA, Director John Deutsch admitted that the CIA was doing the kinds of things they were accused of in California, Los Angeles, and so forth. There was one journalist, whose name will occur to me in just a second, who was crucified by the mainstream press for telling the truth. He ended up out of work, committing suicide. So it was clear what was going on. They needed to fund the Contras in Nicaragua, and the congressional edict said they couldn't do that anymore in the normal appropriations way. So they did Iran Contra. Okay, you ought to look that up. It's really a terrible chapter in our history. I'll tell you one thing about it that I know personally. My mentor as a journalist is Robert Parry. Okay, and he uncovered not only Iran Contra, but Colonel Ollie North's involvement in it, and Bill Casey. And he was invited down to work with Newsweek. And before he was in his 2 weeks later, he said, Bob, you can come to this corporate that's coming down from New York, Newsweek corporate. And so his boss took Bob, and there was a small group of very, very talented people. One guy from Wyoming, his name was Cheney, I think. Yeah, Dick Cheney, and Scowcroft, the previous advisor, just given up being military advisor or national security advisor to Reagan. Okay, so they're having a shrimp cocktail, and Bob Perry's got a piece of shrimp, and Scowcroft says, apropos of nothing, if I were advising my successor, John Poindexter, before the congressional committee the day after tomorrow, I would tell him to tell them that we never told the president anything about this. Never told the president. And Bob, not being used to this, drops his shrimp cocktail fork, shatters his little shrimp cocktail cup, and without thinking says, General Scowcroft, would you be advising your successor to commit perjury before Congress? Dead silence for 15 seconds. And then the head of Newsweek puts his arm around Bob and said, now, Bob, sometimes you just have to do what's best for the people and for the country. And then there was this gentlemanly laughter. And Bob said, my God, there it was. They know what's best for the country, and they'll lie through their teeth for it. So that's just one little vignette. Now, this is Congress. There was a fellow named Dave Obey, Wisconsin, a true patriot. Okay. Now he had the budget committee, but before that he headed the foreign sales committee in the House. Okay. So he's interviewing George Shultz, a good guy, on Iran Contra. And Shultz makes a fatal mistake. He says, now, Mr. Obey, Chairman Obey, I just have to say before we start that the American people are just sick and tired of Iran Contra. Obey rises to the occasion and he says, Mr. Secretary, I didn't take a solemn oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, until I got tired. So you will answer these questions. You will answer them honestly, and let's proceed. My God, I took that oath. All those generals took that oath. The Constitution forbids the deployment of U.S. Army troops in cities such as have been suggested by Trump. And so, the Constitution is, it's the only solemn oath they ever took. And there are a lot of people that took that same oath. Some take it seriously, like Dave Obey, like Bob Perry, but some people know better what's good for the American people, and that would be Scowcroft and Cheney and the rest of them, and they get away with it until now. Now there are enough of us who are going to prevent it.
All right, so, but first of all, there was another question also, or a statement. Do you want to respond to that?
Which part was that?
Well, do you want to repeat? No, What was the thrust of what you would like him to answer?
Oh, well, mine was a response to your questions. So there's not necessarily a question in there for you, just that, yeah, the brief summary was that we're kind of in a bubble, but trying our best. And I'm one of the people who think it's very, very important that we continue trying our best, especially because while it won't affect some of us as much as others, it definitely will affect our futures. We're already feeling it now.
Okay, look, one great usefulness of this moment is you'd have to be really an idiot in the sense of whether you're by design or you want to be, to not recognize the historic significance of this moment. That should not be a discussion one has to have. You know, the president has made it clear, his critics have made it clear. You know, people are in a state of shock, basically, about what's going on, including people who support Trump as well as those opposed him. Because the people who support Trump think what he's saying is obviously true. We have an enemy here. It includes the mayors of these cities that have all been mentioned. They are a threat. They're the enemy within. And the argument of an enemy within has been the driving force for every effort in modern history where you have changed the nature of government from the assumption of representative democracy to some sort of totalitarian system. If there's an enemy within of substantial power, then you're justified in using any means necessary to get rid of this enemy, right? And that seems to be what's in play now. It was also somewhat in play when the attacks were made against Trump. That's why I wanted Ray to discuss the twin, because to say that President Trump, who had been elected by the people, President Trump was an agent or connected with Putin, was subservient to another country and its leader, was a devastating attack against Trump. It was denying his basic integrity. He was saying he's not to be trusted. He was saying that they were saying the election was rigged, just as Trump was then, when he lost, saying the rest was rigged. So what we have here, and this is why I'm insisting on a nonpartisan approach, is that the instability of our society at this time, and yes, in a school of communications, clearly you're not going to have, your future will very much be affected by these kinds of changes, what kind of journalism or what kind of communications you can do. And what I'm saying is both parties were at fault because both parties questioned the election. They fundamentally challenged their opponent's integrity, called them basically agents of some foreign power or enemies, right? And I don't think I'm exaggerating. The attacks on Trump were very serious. If Russiagate, the Russiagate claims, and remember, there were all these things. There were women in Moscow, or this had happened. They had blackmail, or what have you. And now you're getting the same kind of attacks, say, on our governor or on the mayor of Los Angeles, right? Agents, their enemy within. So we've lost the veneer of civility. People did not, even under Nixon or others, talk this way. And when I bring up the bubble, if this is not being discussed in your other classes, if this is not part of the general conversation at a university now, and we're all going to pretend it's not happening, that is an incredible disservice to the notion of education. Now, I'm looking for somebody to challenge what I'm saying or what Ray said. So please, can a hand go up and can a mic? Yes, here we have someone.
Hello. Okay. Um, I agree that it's obviously like a very alarming situation. I think that it's kind of difficult to view it with a sense of urgency given everything that goes on every day. I think we talk about this quite a bit already, but it seems like every day there's like breaking news. And so while I think that the language that he's using is very alarming and will probably be used in a historical context, I just think it's hard to take it as seriously when we're seeing so much of things that people are labeling as unprecedented every day, like with, I don't know, the war in Gaza, or even what we're learning in this class about stuff that has happened in the past. Like when we read that the We Charge Genocide article about how they made that whole plea to the UN and that was swept under the rug. I feel like at that time that was probably labeled as unprecedented, and now we barely even learn about that in our class. Like I only heard about it here. And so I think it's hard to take things as seriously when it seems like we're learning about all these things in these class that we were never taught in any other classes because they eventually just get swept under the rug like the rest of history. And so it's hard to not think that that's what's going to happen with this as well. And I also think to your point about it being discussed in college and in our classes, I think part of what makes it so hard is that this is kind of the only space that we have to talk about stuff like that in academic institutions. Whereas when you kind of leave this classroom or go out into the rest of the world, people are just don't really care as much because they're just focused on their own problems or trying to make it day to day. And so I think it is almost a privilege to be able to be in this classroom and talk about stuff like this, but it's harder when we go out into the rest of the world. I can't just like share all my like anxieties about what's going on because people just are focused on other things and on their own lives and trying to do their jobs and get by and everything.
Were there any other questions? Because there's a lot here and it corresponds to a couple things that have been set up here that I want to get back to. You just described what I think is a very important thing to acknowledge, say, just in the classroom, whether or not you're going out and talking about it with anybody, for the purposes of our rigor, our analysis of the situation, what you just described is the disintegration of that, what you said, that civil or civility, that is really instructive. And I've been trying to think about how to bring that conversation into this classroom in a more kind of clear way, because if that's disintegrating, what are we discovering? What's beneath it, right? What we have with Ray is, as Carlotta said, access to a first-person account of how the cultures shift in these backstage rooms, right? And I think that the comment about generals not leaving the room, these senior military officials not standing, up for the oaths they've taken in response to Trump's declaration, pronouncement, that is a testament to the very historically specific culture of these spaces right now. And I wonder what you think, Ray. Like, how would you describe why? Why is that the culture? How did that happen?
The politicization of the military goes back to at least Rumsfeld when he wanted them to attack Iraq. They already attacked Iraq and it was a piece of cake, right? Oh, yeah, 1991. And when Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of State, went to, he was visited by one of the main generals who had been NATO commander, okay? And this general said, "Now, Paul, way to go, way to flatten those Iraqis. Now, what's the major lesson that you learned from the successful 1991 Desert Storm?" And Wolfowitz said, "Very simple. We can do whatever we want, and the Russians can't do a thing about it." Now, Wolfowitz was a smart guy. He said, now there will come a time when the Russians might be able to do something about it. So we have to make sure in the interim, we make it as difficult for the Russians as we possibly can by pursuing this very aggressive policy. And we know the Wolfowitz document and so forth came later. So that was the whole thing. Now, with respect to Russiagate, the Russiagate was so consequential in an international sense because it persuaded most of us American citizens that Putin, the Russian people, are the devil incarnate, that they gave us Trump, for God's sake. They interfered with our election and they did A, B, C, and D, now totally disproven, but not yet revealed in the mainstream press. So Russiagate was consequential. Would the Americans support if Trump said tomorrow, I want to send some troops in there with the French and the British and the Germans into Ukraine just to make those Russians think we're serious? Would the American people support that? I dare say he could probably wangle up enough support. Why? Because most of our citizens are brainwashed, and that's not too tough a word to use. Brainwashed on Russiagate, and they still think that the Russians have tried to interfere with our elections and our body politic and are threatening us when all they're trying to do is remove the threat they perceive as Stoltenberg admits. They perceived a threat if we let Ukraine in NATO. And they said, look, if you continue doing that, we're going to have to invade. And Stoltenberg's, so we said, no. And the Russians invaded. My God, what kind of leadership do we have at the top of NATO? So this is kind of the attitude that the hoi aristoi, as opposed to us hoi polloi, adopt with respect to foreign relations. And the more educated we are, the more we can share with our neighbors. That's the only way to do this thing. Truth is truth. And I'll quote my friend Julian Assange, who said famously, if wars can be started by lies, they can be ended by truth. So, it's a very empowering thing to do, to pursue the truth, whether it gets through to most of our friends or not. At least we think we've got it, and we think we feel a need to share it. And that's all we can do at this point. Just
Let
be
me ask
honest with
you a
ourselves.
blunt question. You spent your life in the CIA. This is for both conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats. Sometimes they refer to it as the deep state. They refer to its powers. It's overthrown governments all around the world. And I don't want to end this without asking you a communications question, because it was the CIA, which worked with the makers of the movie Zero Dark 30, and developed a view. Was the CIA that got involved in torture over the objection of the FBI. We got that from John Kiriakou. So here we have this agency that you spent your life with, and it overthrows governments. You were on the analysis side. You didn't overthrow governments. But I'm asking, what is going on now when once again we have the description of top mayors as the enemy within? We have a hunt for subversives in our midst. We have the President of the United States saying, I need the military to go into these cities to get the enemy within. So we began this class talking about Orwell and Huxley and dystopian views of America. Where are we now? And I thought with Donald Trump having been the victim of false claims, that he would be more on guard against this overreach of government power threatening freedom. But on the other hand, no, he's doing the same thing to the Democrats that the Democrats did to him. And he's now, but narrowed it. Is the governor of California the enemy within? Is the mayor of Los Angeles the enemy within? And where will the CIA come down on this? Will they give impartial information, or will they come up with fabrications and fake evidence to justify this new? I don't even want to call it McCarthyism, because President Eisenhower was not a supporter of McCarthy. We're now getting this from the top. And so, how alarmed are you? We don't have that much time. We have actually 11 minutes left. How alarmed are you? People have used the word fascism. They've talked about the possibility of America going, we would have this notion of a dystopian future as a possibility. So let's not settle old scores about who got this right about Russiagate or something. I want to know how you, at the age of 86, how alarmed are you about the future of American democracy or its survival?
I've been around almost as long as you, and I've seen a lot of bad places that our country has been in. That's why I have a certain hope here. Well, let me just clarify a couple of things. That is that I was on the analytics side of the CIA. We were set up to tell Truman initially the truth, untreated truth. And what went on the other side of those turnstiles, and I emphasize there were turnstiles between the operatives and the analysts on every floor of that new CIA 7-story building. We couldn't go there, they couldn't go here. Okay, now, so the operatives did what they were told to do, and they had lots of money to do it. And we learned about it in the New York Times. Now, that's really important because when Kennedy was told that the CIA was all behind the Bay of Pigs operation and that Castro was certain to fall because of a major insurrection once we landed on the beach, that was BS, pure and simple. And the reason that we know that now is because Kennedy commissioned Arthur Schlesinger to do a study of what happened. And you know what he found out? He found out that the operations people on this side of the turnstile never asked the analysts, is it likely that Fidel Castro would fall if we landed a couple of hundred people on the beaches of Cuba? They never asked them. And of course, they never told them what they were going to do. So you have this bifurcation, you have this delineation between. Now, the operations people, I think they should go to the Pentagon. If they belong anywhere, they don't belong in an institution that's supposed to do objective analysis. What else? Torture. Well, when I heard that the head of the CIA was going down with Dick Cheney to bang on John McCain's door in the Senate and say, look, you have to make an exception. The CIA has to be able to torture because we get good information to torture. A big lie, of course. When I saw that happen, I said, that's it. I used to work honorably for an institution. Now it openly advocates torture and is doing torture. I took my big intelligence commendation medallion. I took it into the House office buildings with a orange jumpsuit, and I gave it to, what was his name? Pete Hoekstra, the head of that committee. I said, look, I don't want to be associated with the CIA, however remotely. Take back my intelligence medallion. John Kiriakou, a good friend of mine, was the only one that revealed the torture, and they put him in jail for almost 2 years. I used to babysit for his kids when he was in jail. I visited him there. It was awful, but that's what they do to guys. That's what John Brennan actually did to him personally, because he let the cat out of the bag. Now, it's well, the last thing I'll say is that the big issue now is Iran. Is it working on a nuclear weapon? Okay. Now, I'm pleased to tell you that after the debacle on Iraq, where my former analysts now lied through their teeth about weapons of mass destruction and about ties between Iraq and Al Qaeda, somebody said, look, we don't want this to happen again. Bush and Cheney are now they have their sights on Iran, and the people that are advising them, they're going to do Iran before they leave. So somebody said, let's get an honest broker of intelligence to do a national intelligence estimate on Iran. Now, they couldn't find anybody in the CIA. They went to the State Department, got a fellow named Tom Finger, who came in with his own analyst, worked for a whole year. In November 2007, said, on behalf of the community, 16 agencies with high confidence, unanimous, Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work. Besides, there's a fatwa against it. As recently as March of this year, Tulsi Gabbard repeated that judgment. Now we're not so sure unless the IAE goes back into those sites with their cameras and stuff. But there needs to be a reversal of that fatwa, which is a very serious thing in Iran. It's got to be debated openly until they reverse the fatwa against building a nuclear weapon. Don't be misled by enrichment. That's a separate issue. Building a nuclear weapon, then there's a place for honest analysts. And this is about the only thing I can really cite as being consistent and honest. I'd like to close with a kind of warning from Albert Camus, the French philosopher and writer during World War II. He was with the French resistance. And I was cleaning away some papers and I came across this just last night. And I'd like to, if I can find it, I'd like to hear it. Okay. So, a key resistance figure, Albert Camus, in July of 1943, published a, quote, letter to a German friend, end quote. It began as follows. You, my friend, said to me, the greatness of my country, Germany, is beyond price. Anything is good that contributes to its greatness. Those who, like us young Germans, are lucky enough to find a meaning in the destiny of our nation must sacrifice everything else. Now, no, I said, Camus, I cannot believe that everything must be subordinate to a single end. There are means that cannot be excused. And I should like to be able to love my country. I should like to be able to love my country and still love justice. I don't want for my country a greatness born of blood and falsehood. I want to keep it alive by keeping justice alive. Now, I don't have too many more years, but I got to devote them to doing precisely that. You guys out there, I envy you. You've got lots more time. Please remember this little warning. The people in Germany, by and large, did not heed it. Pursue justice. Don't get diverted by these megalomania issues of the greatness of our country, because once that happens, our country becomes not so great anymore, and it'll be our fault.
Okay. It's a historic moment. I want to thank you for spending this time, 2 hours. I know you're really busy. And well, I'm sorry, we have 3 minutes. I did say, because we are a communication school, the movie Zero Dark 30, you got 2 minutes. Was that a lie? And did the CIA use Hollywood and use that movie to plant the lie about the efficacy, the need for torture?
During the 1980s, the CIA set up its own little video Hollywood unit, okay? It grew like Topsy. And right now, you don't have anything having to do with these kinds of issues that isn't vetted and actually produced and directed and influenced by the CIA. The fact that Hollywood people seem to be ignorant of this is kind of hard to believe. There's lots of money in this thing. They've made a lot of money on 0.30. It was totally misleading. Torture doesn't work, for God's sake. You know, there are lots of reasons it doesn't work, but one reason it's just wrong. I mean, it's an intrinsic evil, as we learned in theology and philosophy, like rape, you know, like slavery. It's in that category, torture. You don't do that to another human being. And one time I made the mistake of saying, you know, I come from a Judeo-Christian outlook, and Jesus Christ was tortured to death, right? And the agnostic with whom I was staying in the hills of Berkeley says, you know, thanks, Ray, thanks a lot. I'm all about Judeo. I'm a human being. I don't believe any of this stuff, but I know that torture is just wrong. Kyriako is one of my heroes. And, you know, we should be able to tell the truth. And now, with the judge saying we can even tell the truth about Palestine, well, gird your loins, guys. Get out in the common areas there and tell the truth about what's happening to those poor people in Gaza. Now you don't have to be so much afraid anymore.
Okay,
Round of applause for our guest.
thank you.
McGovern. Thank you so much, Ray, for joining us. Have a good rest of the week, everybody.
Most welcome.
Ray, can you hear me or?
Yes, I can. Mhm.
Okay, I'm gonna unplug this and then
For the,
just, let me just hang up with him. Is that okay? Thanks, 1 second. Okay, Ray, I'm gonna stop recording and then I have this file and I might have the other one upstairs, and I'll make sure you get it as soon as possible, okay?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ray, for joining us. Take very good
Mhm.
care.
Thanks. Bye now.